Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tottenham Way. I'm Tom Barclay of The Sun. I'm joined by George Sessions of the Press Association. We're doing a reaction here to the pretty convincing 3-0 win over Doncaster Rovers in the Carabao Cup last night. To be honest, it was probably exactly what Frank wanted. I know he said the second half was a bit disjointed, and I don't disagree with that, but this was a possible banana skin, I guess, but two early goals in the first half pretty much killed off Doncaster's chances, even though they had a few opportunities, and overall it was a pretty comfortable night in total. George, you had a bit more of a Marcus experience last night compared to what you normally do at watching Spurs when you're normally in the press box. You were there with your little boy in the crowd. I want to start off with what the sort of vibe was. What kind of feeling did you pick up from the way the fans were feeling about Frank Ball and the way it's been going at the moment in what was a relatively comfortable evening?
Yeah, it was a pretty special night for me, to be fair. First game I've done as a fan in 3 years. 2022 was the last time. But yeah, taking my little boy for the first time was really good. And we stayed until the end, so we got to see Johnson again at the end. Sort of around 80 minutes, he was getting tired and he wanted to go home, but he wanted to stay to the end. So I'm glad we did, because we're regularly singing the Johnson again song. But yeah, I think that you're kind of right with that second half. It did sort of, we missed the first 10 minutes of it because we were getting food, and I think it was very busy in the concourse at that point. So you can sort of see how you can have a slow start to the second half when there's not much of a buzz around. And a lot of fans did probably leave around 80 minutes, which is a midweek game, so fair enough. But yeah, I think, as you kind of said, it was a Thomas Frank could not really have wished for a better night, especially no injuries. Didn't have to use any of his real sort of key players that we're worried about injury wise. Christian Romero, Mickey van der Ven, and Richarlison come on and didn't get injured as well. And I think the players he did give an opportunity to, most of them took it. We're going to come on to Mathys Tel. Wasn't his best night, unfortunately, but I thought Archie Gray was really good in centre midfield, and I also thought that Brennan Johnson was a real threat on the right as well, and Joao Palhinha did a job at centre back. Just another kind of option there. All of a sudden, that probably we should have known that, because actually he did that once or twice at Fulham. But yeah, I thought he was good. So yeah, good night and all.
Yeah, that was probably one of our first talking points, was the positional switches, the tactical switches that Frank pretty much makes every game now. It's something that's quite exciting to what's he going to do next, sort of thing. And when the team sheet dropped, I think a lot of us in the press room were presuming it would be Archie Gray starting at centre back. I did wonder about Palhinha, but obviously it came quickly clear that it was Palhinha playing there instead. And then Frank was asked afterwards about Archie and where he sort of saw him now by our good friend Tom Allnut in the press conference afterwards. Asked him, is he basically a midfielder in your eyes? And he did say, no, he can play at centre back, he can play at right back, so he wasn't ruling that out. But he said, but I do see him as a midfielder. And what I found quite interesting about him playing there is I think a lot might have presumed he'd be one of two holders, along with Bentancur, but he wasn't really. He was very far forward. He was an 8, but at times when Tel had gone wide, he was almost pushing up as the sort of furthest man forward. And I thought he played well. It reminded me a bit of the Newcastle performance in pre-season from Gray, which was really encouraging, but obviously got overshadowed by Sonny's farewell game, and then sadly James Maddison's injury. But in that game, he really got on the ball. He caused Newcastle problems. And I thought the same thing here. He picked up some really nice positions, getting in behind the back line of Doncaster. Admittedly, throughout this podcast, the caveat of it being a team that's just been promoted to League One in terms of the quality of opposition, and a team that made 9 changes in Doncaster as well. So it wasn't even their first 11. So Spurs really, should have been comfortable on paper anyway. But I thought Gray made the most of his chance. And then on the flip side, you got Palhinha, who's very quickly looking like an absolute bargain, getting him in on loan. He's now got 2 goals in quite in a short space of time. When he did sign, we were hoping that he would add a few goals, because that's what he showed at Fulham with those sort of long range efforts. But so far, it's been sort of opportunistic efforts, from last night being a set piece, or obviously the goal at Man City as well. And to see him chip in like that and be able to show how dependable he is by filling in at centre back, again, admittedly against lower quality opposition, just showed what a team player he is, and all round a really good signing. Where are you at with Palhinha? Is he now for you a starter in Frank's best 11 if you had back to the old, if you have a Champions League final tomorrow, or is that the beauty of what Frank's doing? He's mixing it up, horses for courses, whatever the game is in front of him, whatever the opposition is in front of him, then he uses his squad accordingly.
No, I think you're right. I feel like Joao Palhinha has very, very quickly become, almost one of Thomas Frank's undroppables, actually. And yeah, sure, there is going to be times where he's not in the starting 11, and we saw that against Villarreal. But even in that Villarreal game, when he came on, he kind of brought that calmness and that assured kind of presence in the centre midfield, which I felt Spurs were lacking a little bit in that second half against Villarreal. And I love how he's really quickly immersed himself into the club, and clearly, yeah, he lived in London before, so he was well versed with London. But with a lone player, they don't always come straight into the team. First of all, don't all settle straight away. And yeah, he's 30 years old. He's very experienced, but he has come in and instantly has felt like a really big player, I think. And I remember him he spoke, didn't he, after the Super Cup really well. And I just remember thinking then, we've said it so many times over the years, Spurs do lack experience and sort of, real calm heads in there. And he's one that goes straight in and takes it up a level. And I thought he was good again last night at centre back, and it gives Spurs an option there. And going back to Archie Gray, really, really pleased for him. We've all kind of said, I said it myself, I don't know, I'm struggling to see where he's going to get starts in centre midfield and where he's going to get opportunities in centre midfield. But he really did take his chance, I think. And you're right, attacking wise, especially linking up on the right with Brennan Johnson and Pedro Porro, that was really, really impressive. And he was always an option. And I guess you're right, he did pretty well. I thought actually in that Burnley game, he's only ever started this season again in central midfield. Again, caveat, it's Burnley, it's Doncaster this time. But the more he plays in midfield and does well, there will be an opportunity this season where he has to come in for a big game because of an injury, because of suspension. And if he's got this behind him as sort of a body of evidence, and then goes into that big game and does well, all of a sudden he puts himself in the conversation with a Bergvall, with a Sarr. And with Sarr kind of missing the last two games, minor groin problem, I think it was Thomas Frank said, didn't he, afterwards? Archie Gray could get more minutes at the weekend if Sarr is unavailable. So he's done his chances going forward this season. No harm with that performance.
Yeah, I think Frank said a stretch of his thigh actually in the presser afterwards, but he seemed to be relatively optimistic that he'd be involved against Wolves. We'll come into a bit of a preview of Wolves later on. But yeah, I'm excited if Archie could sort of show that kind of performance and progress from there, then suddenly Spurs are looking pretty well stocked in midfield. When you consider Bergvall, Bentancur, Palhinha, Xavi Simons, I mean, not even talking about Basuma, presuming he's not going to play much of a role, but he's obviously got quality if he's focused and part of the setup. So I feel Spurs are very much, I've said this a few times, have learned from the mistakes of last season by bringing in more experience. It's what they lacked last year. But the one benefit, I guess, that Frank is benefiting from that Ange didn't really, of signing those young players and being forced to play them mainly through injury, is they have come on leaps and bounds, particularly Bergvall, obviously. But, you point out Sarr as well. He's really come on in the last sort of 18 months. Let's just talk a bit about the early goals. I do feel like there was a helping hand from Donny's goalkeeper, Ian Lawler, and speaking to Grant McCann, the Doncaster manager, in the press conference afterwards. Yeah, I felt for him. First of all, I like Grant McCann a lot. I've actually interviewed him a few times when I used to cover the EFL. He's a good guy, and he speaks well and quite honestly. He basically said that there were some mistakes that were made from Doncaster's perspective for the goals, which they need to work on. But in between, everything else was excellent, really, from their perspective, given where they're at in the sort of football food chain compared to Spurs. And I don't disagree. I feel like the goalkeeper Lawler didn't have his best night particularly for those first two goals. So the first one, it's another set piece, isn't it, from Spurs? Simons, floats the ball in from a corner. He gets a terrible punch on the ball. Lawler, it deflects back to his defender, tries to head it away, and there's Palhinha, Johnny on the spot to put in what you would call, I guess, an overhead kick. It probably wasn't the most acrobatic of overhead kicks, but he still puts it away. And then the second goal, I wanted to ask you about Wilson Odobert in the lead up to this one, George. So Odobert with some, twinkle-toed feet with his step overs, and then a fine sort of drilled ball across. Lawler again gets kind of nowhere near it, and it goes in off the unfortunate Jay McGrath for 2-0. And pretty much after that, we knew where the game was heading. But yeah, on Odobert there, he obviously had that performance against Brighton, which Frank talked about as he described it as promising on the day before yesterday's game, which I think is quite a good description of it. It wasn't anything to go overboard with, but he showed hints of what he can do. And I know there seems to be a bit of a growing maybe frustration or expectation on Odobert and Tel to start delivering a bit more than they have been. We'll come on to Tel in a minute. But from Odobert's perspective, I feel like he built on that Brighton performance again against lower quality opposition and showed the kind of dangerous attributes that he can have that can cause opposition problems.
Yeah, you're spot on. I thought Odobert was really good last night, actually, and quite telling. He only played 60 minutes. I sort of wonder if that performance following on from Brighton has kind of maybe nailed him in to start against Wolves. And look, that's what we want to see from Wilson Odobert, taking players on, beating a man, and then delivering the end product. I think often we sort of see him take on one player, and then maybe he won't take on the second, or he'll pass the ball back into either Jed Spence or Pedro Porro. But yeah, it was a brilliant action. And I guess what was encouraging, I thought, as well on top of that, was he linked up quite nicely with Xavi Simons quite a lot. I thought Xavi Simons did well in the number 10 role. And I guess naturally, given where he played for RB Leipzig, he's going to drift off to the left. And already you could see a bit of a relationship there, that they linked up well for the goal. There's quite a few other times, certainly from short corners, trying to set up Pedro Porro for the same goal about 20,000 times. But actually, I thought Xavi and Wilson Odobert showed kind of, little green shoots of an encouraging partnership there. And if Wilson Odobert is going to get a run on the left, which it feels like at the moment he probably will if Xavi is going to play as the number 10 more going forward, then that's going to be a really important part of that. If Xavi can build up a rapport with Wilson Odobert and be playing the balls through to him, then we will maybe see the best of Wilson Odobert, and it will make me eat my words again. But yeah, I was really pleased with him. It was a brilliant assist, and hopefully more to come.
Yeah, you mentioned Xavi. I was going to talk about him as well. I mean, there was a lovely little sort of crowd-pleasing flick around the corner for Odobert in that first half. And I thought towards the end of the first half, Xavi started to purr when he was on the ball, again, against lower quality opposition, but starting to find his feet. Right from the off in his first game, you could tell how calm he is on the ball. Even if that first performance, I think it was West Ham, not everything came off, but he just seems a cool, composed character, and that's just what you want from someone who's in there to pull the strings. And I think slowly he's starting to do it, and players around him, you're absolutely right, are starting to, with Odobert, are starting to react to it, starting to learn, what he's going to do, the kind of things he's going to pull off, make the right runs, and that's only encouraging. So I thought Simons, particularly towards the end of the first half, really looked like he was enjoying it out there, and that's what we want to see from Spurs. We want to see some control, we want to see some kind of football that can get fans off their seats, and I think he's got the ability to do that, albeit it's Doncaster at home. That what he's really been signed for is to be able to make that difference in the really big games. So let's see if he can do it there. But it was encouraging, I would say. Second half, I mean, obviously he came off around the hour. It became, as Frank said, a bit disjointed, maybe in their minds. With so many, we're really in the hurly-burly of the fixture pile up now. Wolves to come, obviously the trip to Bodo next week. maybe mentally the team started to think, right, this game's won. Let's sort of see it out. Frank talked about the pressure, the press not being quite up to it in the second half, and that was kind of the root of their problems, if they had any, or the way Doncaster sort of got back into it for that first sort of 15, 20 minutes. I think that's pretty fair. How did you see it? And then talk to me, George, about that final goal from Brennan and Brennan overall, because he still seems to some fans a bit of a Marmite character, despite all the goals last season, obviously scoring the winner in the Europa League final. When you're at the game, in fact, that's a good question for you, because when you're at the game, the Johnson Ole chants are pretty much every match. What was the feeling though within on the touchline when he's playing the match? Is there frustration when something doesn't come off, or is it more of an online thing? This kind of frustration with Johnson rather than the fans who are actually in the ground.
Yeah, I think he's a good talking point because I really like him on the right. I think we see the best of him on the right, and he was back there. And actually, his performance reminded me a little bit of the first season under Ange, where actually he didn't score that many goals, but his assist tally was really impressive. I think it was in the double figures in the end, but so often it would be somebody playing the ball out to him in a first time cross, and Richarlison we saw score quite a few sort of near post finishes from him. And really, he should have had a couple of assists last night. Richarlison had one shot from his cutback, which was blocked, and we're going to come on to Tel's big miss. But really, when Brennan Johnson cuts it back for Mathys Tel, he should be scoring in the first half. And there was one in the second half, but there was one in the first half as well. And yeah, that finish at the end from Brennan Johnson is just classic Brennan Johnson. Now, I personally didn't have any doubt that he was going to score. And I was so pleased I actually stayed to the end with my little boy to see him finish it off. And yeah, I guess, I didn't hear, maybe I heard one kind of groan about Brennan Johnson when he tried to beat his fullback and the fullback blocked it. But that was probably the only time. I mean, he had a good performance, I thought. So, if he'd had a poor performance, maybe there would be more. But yeah, I guess that's an interesting point, actually, Tom, that maybe it is more of a social media thing. I think certainly at times there are groans and grumbles from the crowd. Because I remember one occasion, I think it was the start of this season, Brennan Johnson sort of turning and looking at a crowd near us, actually, in the press box in the West Stand, and you could hear somebody moaning about him. And he sort of eyeballed them then. But actually, I didn't hear many at all last night. So maybe it is more of a social media thing, the kind of, the sort of naysayers of Brennan Johnson. And look, it's another goal for him. As I say, he probably should have had an assist as well. And hopefully Kudus isn't going to get injured. But I think we saw last night, albeit again against Doncaster, that if Brennan is required on the right, he's going to be a good option there, and he's going to provide certainly balls in the box for Richarlison. He's obviously very different to Mohamed Kudus, but I also think he still can be really effective, and he's scoring goals. You can't, if at the end of this season Mohamed Kudus has got 5 goals but 12, 13 assists, and Brennan Johnson's got kind of 8, 9 goals and maybe 5 assists, then as a sort of a right wing pair, they've kind of done their job. And I think Thomas Frank will probably be hoping for that.
Yeah, I agree. I do wonder if supporters need to change their expectations to a certain extent. It reminds me a bit of Trent at Liverpool, where fans, maybe not, I'm not sure about Liverpool fans, but general England fans, I suppose, constantly get frustrated with what he couldn't do rather than focusing on what he could do. And with Brennan, I don't think he's ever going to be technically amazing. I don't think he's ever going to be someone who's going to beat a man like Kudus can. But he has other attributes. He's a really good finisher now, as he proved last night. And maybe that should be celebrated more and focused on that, what he brings to the party in that sense. He's a finisher, rather than expecting him to develop into this winger who can beat players. And maybe once fans sort of accept that, they can, again, focus on his strengths rather than his weaknesses. I think his challenge now is to try and find a way into the first team on a regular basis. And with Kudus locking down the right side, which, as you pointed out, does seem to be Johnson's best position, it is difficult for him. I'm not wholly convinced by him off the left, although he started the season from a goals perspective well in that position. So at the moment, I think back to that old Frank's best 11, I do think he starts on the bench. which is a bit of a strange thing to say given the season he had last year. But he's still young, still got full of development to come in, and talk about Frank and the way he develops players. Maybe there's a lot of growth to come in Brennan in being able to use those assets. But anyway, let's talk about another player just before we have an ad break. Let's talk about Mathys Tel. So he's a talking point off last night. He had these two chances that he sort of fluffed his lines with both of them. The first, both from Johnson passes. The first one in particular was a bit of a glaring miss, an air shot. Second half wasn't quite an air shot, but not far off it. And I felt for him. You could see how much he wanted it last night. There was one particular effort he had, a sort of drilled shot where he probably could have passed it. But you could tell he really wanted a goal. And I asked Frank afterwards, is this a classic case of someone who just needs the ball to go off their backside to get their goals up and running? And he sort of agreed with him. But it was interesting. He agreed with that point. Frank's comments were quite interesting. I don't know if it's a sort of way of trying to boost Tel's confidence, but he said that he felt like it was a step up in performance compared to his display against West Ham, where he played through the middle. And whilst he said his end product, obviously there's no dressing up. He missed those chances. The way he got into those chances and created them for himself by running into the box was the basis for him saying his performance had stepped up. What do you think? I mean, the jury's definitely out on him. Again, with Odebear, it's what Spurs could have done instead. They could have put that money together to buy a player. I don't know, it's always as simple as that. Obviously, wages come into it, but they could have bought effectively, a £50 million player rather than two of these players. But did you feel for him last night? Could you sense how much he wanted it and it just didn't quite happen?
Yeah, I could almost feel it in the crowd, actually. Everyone was around me was sort of willing him on. Whenever he got the ball, it was kind of, go on, Tel, have your kind of moment. And yeah, the two, obviously he did have a really good shot, as you mentioned. That was encouraging to see. But yeah, the two chances he missed, I guess it's sort of more the second half one that stands out for me. But actually, the first half one where he just has an air kick is obviously just a classic forward in a bad moment, out of form, isn't it? And then that second half one, that seemed the moment for me. I think everyone sort of held their breath thinking he's gonna smash that in, and he just completely fluffs his lines. Look, I'm probably leaning on the Thomas Frank side of things. It is encouraging, as cliche as it is, that he's in the position to miss those chances, because that's been a real concern, hasn't it? That he's not even been having chances in these other games that he started. So at least he got in those positions, but we're also talking about £30 million forward, and we don't want him to be getting in the position to miss chances. We want him to be taking them. So yeah, real frustrating night for him, and a little bit similar to Archie, although Archie's really pressed his case forward. I now look at where Tel's minutes going to come. Last night was without Dominic Solanke and Randall Kolo Muani, who you'd like to think, if they're not available for Wolves, they're going to be available for Bodo the following week, when Tel won't be available. So I just kind of worry about where Tel's going to get his minutes. It sort of felt like he needed to have a moment last night. Even if it wasn't a goal, he just needed a moment. And, I wanted to see him on the left, and he did play the last half an hour on the left. But again, albeit he got into position for that chance, he didn't really have any runs, or didn't have a real moment where everyone kind of got off their feet for him. So it was an opportunity missed, and I just feel for him. I do struggle to see where the minutes are going to come now over the next couple of months. And maybe if you get to January and he's not played, it does need to be a loan just to try and, boost his confidence and get his development going in the right direction again. But yeah, it's a shame for him. It felt like the perfect opportunity to make his mark, and he certainly didn't, unfortunately.
Right, George, for audio listeners now, we're going to go to an ad break, but afterwards we're going to talk about Newcastle. Obviously, they're the next opponents. A tough trip for Spurs in the fourth round. Wolves, and also Spurs' latest wonder kid. So, George, let's start off with Luca Williams-Barnett. He comes off the bench for his debut at 16 against Doncaster on Wednesday evening. I can't say he had much involvement. I think a few fans were hoping he'd come on a bit earlier to have more of a chance. But just sum up what an achievement that is to be playing for Tottenham at that age.
Yeah, it is a remarkable achievement. There's really not many. He's not the youngest, but Mikey Moore did it a couple of years ago. He was only 16. Alfie Devine played when he was 16. There's another name that escapes my attention who is the record holder, but yeah, there's really not many. And look, you don't see 16-year-olds playing first team football generally, full stop. But yeah, brilliant for Luca. And yeah, I was really hoping Spurs would get the third goal earlier, and then maybe Janai Byfield could come in as well. But I really was sort of hopeful, and Thomas Frank had kind of hinted, actually. He spoke really, really glowingly of Luca in Tuesday's press conference, which was a bit of a hint to everyone that he would certainly be on the bench and may try and get him on. And then both him and Byfield were not involved in the under-21s on Tuesday night, which sort of cemented that they were going to be in the squad. But yeah, brilliant moment for him. He had a couple of touches, tried one sort of dribble and got tackled. But there was one little kind of jink in between two players, and he played a pass out wide. I think it was the Destiny Udogie, which might even have been for the disallowed goal, potentially. But yeah, there was one or two moments from Luca Williams-Barnett. And I think that it just kind of underlines what a special talent Spurs have. And I guess it's probably a good time to praise the academy as well. There's a lot of there's a real crop of young players around this squad. Obviously, Mikey Moore's out on loan, and Will Lancashire as well. But you've got Janai Byfield there. You've also got Malachi Hardy, who's wasn't involved last night, but he's captained England age groups and done really well. And Teenan Thompson was on the bench as well. He's had a brilliant couple of months for the under-21s. And Stuart Lewis is now part of Thomas Frank's first team setup, and he was previously the under-18 coach, and he has brought all these guys through. And then Wayne Burnett in the under-21s has developed them even further. And it is an exciting time. As fans, you want young players to come through. We want to see the next Harry Kane. We were talking about him on the last episode, and if any of these young players can come through, it's going to help Spurs' club trained issue first of all, but more importantly, it just gives kind of fans, one of their own playing in the team, and I think it's an exciting time for Luca, especially. It's very easy to compare him to Mikey Moore because they're both very skillful attacking players, and they both like to play on the left. And I guess when I look at Luca, he just does look a little bit more ready-made, I think, for men's football compared to Mikey. I think Mikey's a huge talent. I still insist he's going to do really good things for Tottenham. But I think Luca almost looks just that little bit older and a little bit more filled out, that maybe he could make an impact in men's football. And he certainly is for the under-21s. And look, touch wood, there is no injuries for Spurs in that position. But if all of a sudden there are, then he could find himself back on the bench, and probably the Newcastle game may be another option for him. He could be on the bench then if he continues to do so well as he has done so far for the under-21s.
Yeah, well said. I mean, for anyone sort of wondering about Luca Williams-Barnett and his impact he's already made this season in under-21s in 6 games. He's got 6 goals, 4 assists, got a 39-minute hat-trick against Leicester on Friday night. So seems to be ripping it up at that level despite being only 16. He was on the bench last season at Galatasaray. And I remember, frantically swatting up about him at the time. He was supposed to be in school the next day. So there's been a lot of buzz around him for a while. For now, I suppose it's now about once he's made his debut, Frank's sort of managing him and expectations and seeing where it goes. But it is interesting now with modern day football. He's not the only youngster who is playing in the scene at the top level now. I mean, Max Dowman at Arsenal obviously has made a massive impact. I've seen him a few times now, and really he's very, very good. Rio at Liverpool also has made a fantastic impact, scoring at Newcastle as well. So I don't know whether it's those 2 players or those 3 players are an example of one-off talents, or whether the game is just getting younger now. I don't know, and the game has changed. I actually asked Frank about that last night. One other person to mention is another one of Spurs' own, but he was playing for the opposition. Damola Ajayi was playing for Doncaster, getting a rare, not a rare start, but he hasn't started all the time in the league. He's been involved a lot, but generally off the bench. What did you make of his performance? He only really had a sort of cross early doors, which I'm not even sure if that was meant to be a shot, but it did lead to a good chance. But after that, he was a bit of a peripheral figure, but I guess that's what you'd expect against Spurs.
Yeah. When he had that moment in the first kind of couple of minutes, I was thinking, okay, here we go. He's going to come back and haunt Spurs. I think actually probably a very smart thing for Spurs to do. In hindsight, now that they've won, to actually let him play. I certainly didn't expect he would play. As I said in the last pod, I don't think anybody did until we got to Tottenham's training ground on Tuesday afternoon, and we were told that he did have permission from the club to feature against Spurs. Quite an unusual situation, but I think as an experience for him, and certainly the big round of applause he got as he went off on the hour mark, when clearly Spurs fans, even if they weren't there for the Elfsport game, that they would have known by then that it was one of their own. That was a really nice moment for him, and not many kind of chances for him to kind of make his mark, but just a great experience nonetheless to be going up against Pedro Porro, Jed Spence, Kevin Danso, Joao Palhinha. Obviously, some of those guys he would have known anyway from last season. But it was nice actually at full time. A couple of the Spurs players sort of made a point of going over to him. Lucas Berger gave him a little pat, and Brennan Johnson was having a little chat with him, which I thought was quite nice actually. We could see that on the screen. So really a special occasion for him, and hopefully he can kick on and keep having a good loan there and get a few more starts.
Yeah, of course, the draw could have been kinder to Spurs. Newcastle away, it couldn't have been much harder, to be honest. The reigning champions of this competition. It's been a difficult time for Newcastle with the Alexander Isak situation, but they still seem. I feel like their performances this season have been much better than the sort of points return in the Premier League, and they're going to be a difficult prospect by the time the game comes around. Nick Voltemada might be up to speed. He looks a real handful. They've got bags of quality all over the pitch, really. And Spurs don't have the best record of late up in Newcastle, particularly during the Ange period. But I have more confidence in Thomas Frank in this particular game. Again, don't want to sort of denigrate Ange's record. He obviously is an icon for winning the Europa League, but he didn't have his best times up at St James's Park. And it feels like with Frank's ability to mix it up, make the most of set pieces, all those marginal gains, I feel like there's more of a chance for him to go and win this game than maybe Ange might have done. I mean, how do you see it, Newcastle away? Do you, as a fan, do you hold out much hope for that game?
I feel like I speak for every fan that last night when they saw that draw sort of exhaled and was like, oh God, really? Newcastle? I was sort of just pulling back. River was asleep in the car. I had a great night and saw Newcastle. Was like, oh God, that's not the trip I wanted. And also I had a look earlier. It's not sandwiched between good games either for Spurs. They're away to Everton the week before, and they're at home to Chelsea on that following the weekend after. So it's going to be hard, that. And Newcastle played a pretty strong team actually last night when I had a look. I was quite surprised. Bruno Guimaraes was playing, and they had a lot of big hitters actually involved. So, and they are the holders. They're at home. I would imagine Eddie Howe would go strong. So as much as I wanted Spurs to really go for this competition, I could see him going out in the fourth round there. Frank will make changes. He's got to use a squad. I just wonder if Spurs is if he makes 6 or 7, if Spurs are good enough to get through at St James's Park. They did, take a little bit of crumb of comfort going back over the years. 2008, they went there in the League Cup and won when Spurs were holders actually, and they got to the final that year. So hopefully a repeat means Spurs can get to the final if they can get through. But I think that's going to be a really, really tricky game. And as I said, especially sandwiched between Everton away and Chelsea at home, it's they're not really great fixtures for that to have that in between, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. Let's wrap things up with looking ahead to the Wolves game at the weekend. Wolves have lost all their matches so far. So, of course, Spurs fans are are talking about Dr. Tottenham coming to do what he does best for teams who are ailing and in need of a helping hand. But I don't know. I feel like Spurs seem like a different prospect so far this season under Frank. Maybe it's the start they've made, and we have to have a bigger sample size because, as we've said a few times, Spurs often start well under new managers. But it's almost just the way he mixes things up and the resilience of this team and the sort of fundamentals that they've built their early form on of defensive solidity, set pieces, with hopefully the attacking side of things to come. That gives me certainly more confidence that they'll go out and win this match. Although I think a lot of people thought the same with Bournemouth. I mean, Wolves, I don't think are obviously as good a team as Bournemouth, but Newcastle away where they lost 1-0, they were pretty unlucky in that match. They played well. They probably should have taken the lead, and they showed that they have quality, and they also have a pretty decent recent record against Wolves. I mean, there was the 2-1 home win a couple of years ago, I guess, when Pedro Neto ripped Spurs apart. He's obviously not there anymore, so that's a good thing from Spurs' perspective. Last year, the 4-2 away, which is absolute diabolical performance from Spurs' perspective, when by then they looked to have given up on the Premier League at that point, and it was all about the Europa League. How do you see Frank approaching this? What kind of changes are you expecting, both sort of from a tactical perspective and personnel?
Yeah, I was thinking about it earlier. Actually, I think midfield is the big one on this occasion. I think, and I would like to see Xavi continue in the 10 position. So you've got two other midfield roles, and having kind of thought about last night, and Palhinha being at centre back, which is not the most kind of physically demanding position for him. I think it will probably be a Bergvall, Palhinha, Xavi midfield. And then Bentancur will probably play away to Bodo the following week. I don't think in this game you should be playing Xavi, Bentancur, and Palhinha. It's not enough sort of legs in there. It's not enough passing ability. And I think Bergvall, the kind of runner form he's on, and he played the brilliant pass actually for Brennan Johnson, we should say. So he got a great assist there, and he did have the ball in the net on another occasion. I think Bergvall should be starting this game, and I think he will. I think that'll be the midfield combination, and I guess Jed Spence playing last night probably means Destiny Udogie comes in. Every single week or every single 3 days, it's so hard to predict what Thomas Frank's going to do, but I think that's probably the areas I see. I mean, what would you do in those forward areas? I guess assuming that Dominic Solanke and Randall Kolo Muani are not going to be fit enough to start.
Yeah, well, Solanke's interesting, isn't it? Because him and Kota Takai, who's we haven't seen anything of since he signed. Frank did say they'd both been training ahead of the Doncaster game, which was a bit of an update to be involved in team training. But he'd already ruled out Solanke, and obviously neither of them were even on the bench. So if Solanke's going to be involved, you'd think it would probably be a cameo performance towards the end. Muani, you hope is going to be fit by then, but again, his lack of minutes just generally in recent months, can't see him starting. So presumably Richarlison back in up front, hopefully a good performance from him, because I feel like the start of this season has shown everything about Richarlison, apart from the injuries which he's had, thankfully. Yeah. It showed the Burnley game showed his ability to do things that a lot of players can't do. That unbelievable sort of bicycle kick was fantastic. It shows his ability to do those kind of score those kind of goals. But also there have been performances like the Brighton one where he was going down very easily, sort of getting into little arguments with players, getting distracted. And overall, he's been good, but it's not like his goal return's been stellar. And I think that's just kind of what you're going to get from Richarlison. He might go through little purple patches like he did under Ange a few years ago. And he's a good player and a reliable player when he's fit, but he's not a lethal centre forward over the sort of course of time. And I don't think Spurs can hang their hat on him if they on a regular basis, not just from an injury perspective, but if they want to be, challenging right for the top. But he's a good squad player. Definitely a game like this, you'd fancy his chances to get a goal. Could do with one, I suppose. Obviously, Kudus plays. That's non-negotiable now, and it's just about the left-hand side. Brennan getting that late goal states his claim, but as we talked about earlier, I don't think either of us are completely convinced it suits him wide left. So if Odebear is up to it, with his hamstrings and fitness issues he's had in the last ever since joining Tottenham, then there is a question mark there. I still wonder if maybe he goes with Xavi again off the left, and if Sarr is fit to start. But I would like to see Xavi start in the middle for a game like this, and then try and give a chance, and maybe for Odebear to build up that relationship between the two of them. But that left hand side remains not a problem position, but one that no one is really nailing down at the moment. And it will be interesting to see how that develops through the season, because I think already a lot of Tottenham fans are going, look, we need a Kudus type player on the left, a top quality signing in that position, maybe a top quality signing up front as well. And if they did manage that, what a team they would have. But they've also got these young players who could develop under this master developer in Frank and become that player that they're seeking. But they need to show a lot more than what they've shown so far to convince fans that will be the long-term solution, I would say. Wouldn't you?
I think we can see now why they were going so heavily for Savinho, can't we? At the time, I was thinking, it's a little bit harsh on Tel, on Odebear, on Mikey Moore further behind to go for another young player. But having been at Arsenal last weekend and seen Savinho sitting on the bench for most of the game, which is what he's done most of the season, I think it makes a lot of sense why Spurs were so big on him. And I think a little faux pas, I guess, in the last one I called the Lewis family the new owners. So did Marcus, actually. I think what we both mean is that sort of the new people necessarily with the real power, I guess, because previously it's felt like Daniel Levy's had the power. But I think an early big kind of tick alongside the Lewis family's name would be to go in January and put the money down for Savinho. Thomas Franks it sounded like very excited to work with him. And unless Wilson Odebear can really find some sort of consistency, I think, over the next couple of months, and he might do, so that is definitely an option. Unless he does, though, I think Savinho will be itching to get out of Man City in January and play minutes before the World Cup. So I think it's that's another one that's potentially as a January window signing to make a big statement for the newish owners or the new power people at the club, the Lewis family. I think that could make a lot of sense. And it's not a problem, I guess, for Thomas Frank at the minute, but it's just kind of a conundrum that, we're almost into October and he hasn't figured out yet. And he can play Xavi there, of course, but I think at home to a bottom half team, which I think is fair to say for Wolves, I want Xavi as the number 10. I want him dictating play. So I think he will play as a number 10. But whenever Spurs play Wolves again, I presume in the 2026, maybe Savinho will be lining up on the left. You never know.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I do think some of us were wondering why they were so heavily interested in Savinho, but it's very quickly become apparent, hasn't it? That pretty much wraps things up, guys. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at the Tottenham Way Pod. We love your comments on there, your interactions. If you noticed from the last podcast, we did a lot of sort of Q&As of the questions that have come in or the comments that come in both on YouTube, on email, which you can get us at the Tottenham Way pod@gmail.com. And obviously over on X at the Tottenham Way and on Instagram at the Tottenham Way Pod. All those kind of interactions lead to great podcasts. I thought that one that you guys did was really good, helping to sort of boost our sort of community that we're trying to bring here for Tottenham fans. So let us know, give us a subscribe and a like on the YouTube channel, and let's see what Thomas Frank can serve up next at home to Wolves. That pretty much wraps it up. Thanks, George. Thanks for listening, guys.